Hello once again, everyone, and welcome back to Zettel. And joining me once again is Eric. We're back into our regular filming schedule with this. So today we're going to be talking about further discussion of the Vorsetzen, and specifically how not to parry versus correctly parrying. Then we're going to get to the Ansetzen. So, first off, how not to parry. The way you don't parry when someone cuts or thrusts at you is it's described as you keep your tip high in the air and just essentially set off. So you can think of this as just, Eric cuts at me, just put your sword in the way. Now, mind you, while this is how not to parry, don't think of this as you won't do this. We all do, and I'm pretty darn sure that people did historically too, otherwise they wouldn't draw attention to it. The most important thing as far as what you're considered as being a student of the KDF should be if you recognize that you are starting to do this, you should immediately exit. Like for example, I may have a situation where Eric does a couple cuts at me. Okay, cool. Oh no, that one took me by surprise. On the very next one, I should be trying to do my best to get myself back out of distance again and get back to a good fighting place, either by retreating into a hudden, as we'll talk about in a second, or quite literally, using my next tempo to entirely void distance, entirely disengage. Because once you've started doing this, pushing yourself back out without creating enough distance and time is very unlikely to succeed, because all he can do is continue to hound you. And most importantly, and I'll show this on air, is the big one that most people see is, of course, if I cut at him and he just essentially blocks, right? Because his tip is so high in the air, it's easy to take forearms. I think more dangerous than that, because we've already talked about it so far, is the Vinden, which is really what we're about to get into. If his sword has not made an angle, my Vinden doesn't require really all that much outer winding at all. It's really more just a quick inversion, and it's straight up his throat. Not to mention as well, by being more vertical, he also has significantly less pressure against me should I choose to wind against his blade. So it's really just never a good thing. Now, tip high in the air is generally just meaning this. There are other times when I would describe as being in the same family, and that's when people do a bogan-like motion, a hanging parry, but don't move their feet. So, for example, if I throw a cut at Eric and he just essentially puts the sword between us, right? No, not wrong, bogan. There we go. Yeah, this is basically the same situation. Sure, could he cut? Yes, but one, by the time he does, I'll have already shamed him. But two, there's nothing stopping me from taking whatever exit I want to do against him. So really just treat it as these flat positions are all kind of in that same family of, if you recognize you're doing it, generally you didn't move your feet when you did it, you should be trying to get out of there. Okay, so now that we understand how not to parry, let's talk about how you should parry. This is where we get the Vorsetzen again. So, the best way to parry is with a cut or a thrust. So I want to show just a stagnant good parry, and then I want to talk about how this could be a much broader horizon. Let's switch sides real quick. So, of course, the most classical thing that pretty much everyone has shown at one point or another is to parry a long point. He cuts at me, I go to long point in a cut or thrust-like motion, and this is the best example of I have parried successfully. Because my tip is more at him than his is at me, and for him to come around will take a very, very long time, and I can just maintain the center and hound him down in life strike. The problem is, that doesn't necessarily implicate the amount of diversity that's possible. This could be any cut or thrust, and we just got given 5 of them, 5 very important ones. So first, let's just look at Ober, Unter, Heck, Even, Mittel, right? So, should he cut at me and I choose to use an Ober? Cool, that can get me a lot. Should he cut at me and I choose to use an Unter? That can get me a lot. Should he cut at me and I choose to use a Mittel? This one's the less successful one, but still matters. The idea is, I'm not swinging at his sword, but I am decidedly focused much more on cutting out into that space. And that always creates a somewhat favorable angle. The Mittel is somewhat debatable, but basically, the point of it is it shouldn't just be cut in regards to, oh yeah, I'm kind of doing a cut. It should be cut between you. The way I like to think of this is there's Eric, and then there's where Eric will be, Phantom, Quantum, Future Eric. I would like to be cutting at Phantom, Quantum, Future Eric, and it doesn't matter what I cut for. But when I do so, it will put me into a place of advantage every time. What about thrusts? Well, you got 4 of them that you can use. No, you can keep cutting. Well, I mean, strictly speaking, you can thrust as well, but we'll have you keep cutting, right? I'm here, he cuts. There's my thrust getting the same idea. I'm here, he cuts. Same idea. I'm down here, he cuts. Same idea, or even all the way up. I'm here, he cuts. Definitely all the way up on that side. It's the same idea. And this can really make a big difference because when you're moving between guards and cuts, is when you get this nice little blend of activation versus non-activation. So put a pin in that for a second, but let's talk about the Meisterhau. The Meisterhau are also the Vorsetzen, right? I could use those cuts as well, cuts and thrusts, to parry. So sure, we think of, for example, the Krumpfau as always being, I will approach him at guard at best eye, and I will hit his arms, or I will approach him at guard at the shoulder, and I will hit him, right? But as well, anytime I find myself in a position where I'm moving through that place, so for example, one of the ones I like to use is I just cut, and I missed, and he's cutting at me. Choosing to do a Krumpf as a parry, instead of, for example, just working on bringing extension, got me a lot more in a much shorter place of time, and as well, it's a lot more active. Once you start being active, it is easy to continue to be active than it is to stop and go. So there's the Krumpf, for example. What's another example? Well, we've certainly got our shield and other places like that, so all sorts of positions that I can use a cut-like motion to parry. Or alternatively, let's use the Zwerch. That Zwerch just saved me, because that wasn't just me lifting up into Ox, that was me throwing a Zwerch, and that's what gave me the extra little bit of angle to stop his downward cut. Okay? What about Zettel? Zettel's kind of the outlier, right? Krumpf, Zwerch, Shield, Zorn, those are all great, but what about Zettel? How do you use that as any sort of going out into parry? My best advice, distance. Same way we did before. If I know I'm going to cut more vertically, let me make sure that I'm getting this kind of angle. Or alternatively, another thing to consider is it is very good for overbind. So if he's cutting at me cutting vertically but moving to the side just gave me a wonderful overbind. So this is to say that your cuts should be utilized in two depths. Out at him when we are crossing no man's land, but also here where he wants to be anytime his sword comes toward me. And this allows me to start being much more dynamic, and you'll notice a lot of these combo together quite well. So as he starts throwing multiple cuts or actions at me, all of a sudden I'm being able to do more things in my defense, both with cuts and thrusts. This is also the reason that at the end of last season, as you will, I talked about the idea of doing the Meisterhau on the blade, right? So maybe, for example, he throws an initial cut and I parry it with something, right? Okay, but he chooses to work. So now I use that Krumpf on the blade to escape. Maybe now he chooses to cut at me. Now I do the last thing, which is I didn't block, I retreated back into a hut, or hood, right? Basically, the extra thing I want to tack onto this idea of Vorsetzen is you can't always go forward. You can't always be in extension, because the more in extension with your cuts or thrusts, the more danger your hands are put in. He will eventually realize, fine, if I can't take your body, I'll take whatever you give me. This is where you make the choice to retreat into one of your either forehangers or any of your hooden, which really is mostly your ox and flute, both cases, but there are some exceptions to this. So like I talked about springing away at a distance. For example, maybe I did just let's do my favorite combo again, right? Where I just cut and expose myself, and I use a Krumpf, but on the next cut he decides to throw at me. Maybe I just pop back, right? Now he could of course still reach, but now Eric has a lot more consideration before he goes forward. I'm set up in my low flute, he's tipped forward, but I've got just as much good chance as him. This isn't necessarily going to stop him, but it's given me more options when he does do whatever he's going to do. Now that parry is also becoming a counterattack. And that's really the long and short of it is, defend less, offend more in ways that defend you. And as well, just occasionally taking that choice to, as someone cuts to you, sometimes even multiple times, to just hang out in a guard for a second, can make a huge difference. One of the situations I see a lot is people get kind of close to each other. Not like crazy close, just kind of close. And maybe I'm trying to work, and Eric decides he just doesn't care about working and starts just trying to cut around me, right? Sure, I could move my blade, but that's trying to be blocking with my tip high in the air. So what if instead I just let myself stay in my hook, right? Sure, I still have to move enough to defend myself, but now that's gone from me ending up here where I'm clearly blocking and leaving a big opening, to here where, sure, he can try to go back where he wanted to before, but I can deal with that too. I'm dictating where he goes by essentially staying closed and directing my point where he then tries to throw. So, all that to say, this is the way you should be parrying. You should be attacking. If you're not attacking, you should be going to a guard. Best way to go to a guard is to attack. Now we've got that idea, let's talk about how you deal with someone who is able to fence in this way. So Eric is no longer this chump that I can just walk up and deal with. Now he's someone who always sets himself in some way, shape, or form. And for this, we'll go for the most classic sort of way. So Eric's going to throw a Zorn, I'll throw a Zorn, right? Well, rather, I'm throwing it over. So I throw it over, he Zorns. Okay, cool. Now the trick is, he won't let me come away, right? I try to pull my blade away and work, he follows. Can't do that, right? Okay, maybe if I try to opt in, oh, can't do that either, right? Maybe I can try and be clever and drop my tip, and oh, he's just got that locked down. Basically, any movement on the blade, he can seek the next opening before I can. So how do you deal with this sort of person? This is where we're going to look like we're going to come away and go right back in. So, I cut down, there's his lovely Zorn. Now, when I up-name him against him, and this is true no matter what direction you go, but this is the most classical one, I must do the following. I have to lighten on the blade, I have to aim my tip at either hand or head, and then I have to step out. What Eric is waiting for is he could follow me here, but that's of course really difficult to do in time. He's really waiting for me to get to about here and seek the opening that I make when I transition my tip. So what I do is I go up to that point, he starts to get ready to turn over, which means he disengages his hands, and that's when I go back into the hole. So, I cut, boom, I come back, then I push myself back down the same hole. And this could be done in a couple different ways as well. Of course, the classical one is quite literally, I just come back in, either because he turned or because he weakened. But you could also, if you want to, turn this into a wind that cuts. So I could come back and then explode my way back in that way, which is particularly good against people who are starting to become wise to this. Our class is currently working through von Bauman's spec book, Codex Wallenstein. One of the very first things we do out of the scales is we learn about the idea of cutting forward. So now Eric's ready for that, so he won't let me just push, right? So when I pull back, that little bit of whine got me a lot deeper and has just put me in a lot better place to do evil things to him. So that's how you get over someone from Vorsetzen. So let's look at another example of that. Eric, your choice. Any of the Maestro that put their tip at me. I'm going to cut him and he's going to do something. Okay, cool, a shield, right? Now he's stuck on me. If I try to leave, he's going to follow me, right? And he's going to follow me worse than normal. If I try to wind down, oh yeah, he's definitely got me there, right? So I'm going to, okay, Eric, I'll come away. Except I lied. And in this place, you can also start looking at how can I come toward the weak of his blade before I push back down. And the more complex hand motion they do, especially if they're starting to put themselves into thumb grip, the better chance you have of getting that flat. I would like to, hold your sword up. With sharps, it's not that you can't go back in. You absolutely can. But it's a lot easier if you're on the flat. So the more I can come away, but then re-engage on top of that flat, the better the chance I have of making a much wider opening. So if I can do that, I'd like to do that. And someone who over parries from thumb grip, or stays in thumb grip a lot, is particularly susceptible to this. So, that's all of our Vorsetzen. What about Ansetzen? The other thing I said we were going to talk about today. This is basically the same idea. That was us dealing with an attack when it comes out. What about dealing with an attack before it even arrives? You have four options, basically. Your ox on one side, your ox on the other, your flug on one side, your flug on the other. The essential through line of this lesson is that if I am already tipped forward and he attempts to attack in any way, shape, or form, the best place to hit him is in the moment he is drawing back. So, for example, probably the easiest one is I'm in flug and he gets ready to do whatever attack he's going to do, and I follow him. This is particularly useful against people who know the Meisterhau, because Eric knows if I'm in flug and he's not in anything ready to do the Schildhau, he doesn't really have as great an option. If he throws an over, I'm going to kill it. If he throws an unter, I'm going to kill it. If he tries to thrust, I'm definitely going to kill it. So he goes, fine, I'll load up for something intentional. And I don't let him throw that Schildhau. I follow him as soon as I see his hands going back. Now he may still parry, but that's not a concern of mine, because I just went from, I was already stable, go, fine, we will keep hunting. Either with my tip, if I have that ability, or, honestly, transitioning into the Durchlaufen, which is something we'll get to in a while. This works on both sides. I could also be in something like an ox, and he draws back to do whatever he's going to do, or drops his hands down. That's just as good. Anytime his hands move in distance and I am already tipped forward, stab. And this could even be something as simple as just he got absent-minded, right? One of the ones I really, really like to do, especially on my left, is that Eric is currently feeling pretty good about himself. He's just not ready to attack right now. Now, he doesn't need to draw back his hands to thrust, because we're not trying to put these swords through each other. But maybe he decides, if I switch feet, I'd feel a lot better about myself. So go ahead and rewind. So as soon as he tries to do that foot sweep to distance, is when I catch him out, getting that side that is coming forward, really giving me a sweep place. Or if I'm late, I can also choose to go to the other side. Works exactly the same. That is Ansetzen. Nothing complicated, just your tip forward, one of your 4 tip forward guards. He draws back his hands to do any sort of action, fill the gap. He parries, keep filling the gap. Just keep hunting after them. This one is one of the most useful, but hardest to kind of cultivate at first because you have to be patient. Anytime you're in a tip forward guard, this is now a thing that you can utilize, and the more that people respect your tip forward guards, the better a chance you have of doing this. Of course, there's also the nice fallback that if, for whatever reason, I'm late, he does manage to load his shoulder, right, or what have you. Okay, cool. Well, come get me. Good thing I'm still in a good guard, right? And when he does, I use my defense that I was already going to use, and I can keep hunting for him. And that's kind of our through line for the windmill section. Your tip, more on target than his tip, able to hunt wherever he goes, and it should be relatively gentle, which is something we're going to talk about soon. But basically, these binds, while they are strong, should not be hard. You should be hearing that relatively light, gliding noise instead of this. Once this is starting to happen, it doesn't require anyone to actually push a tip out of direction to make an op-name fast enough to do. Both hands are light though. For me to get to the point that I op-name him, he's got to move his sword significantly farther, which makes it easier for me to know when it's safe to cut his arms, and also makes him a lot safer, which is good, because then I get to exploit something that made him feel safe. Otherwise though, thank you very much, Eric. And thank you all very much for watching. I will try my best to continue to be consistent with content, and I'm feeling a little better, but certain series will still be on hold here and there as I go. So thank you all very much. We'll go over some other techniques another time.